Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tonight's learning is dedicated in memory of Leah Bas Feivel, and tonight's theme that I want to discuss with you very briefly is the question regarding, in this week's Parsha Shemini, Nadav and Avihu. They were the sons of Aaron. And, if we think about it, you think about a simcha in your life. You want everything to go right. It should be, we should be on cloud nine. We should be ecstatic. We should enjoy it. Everything seemed to be set up for tremendous joy and ecstasy for Aaron. It was the inauguration of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and Aaron was there. Everything was working well, and all of a sudden, after the construction, sacrifices have been offered by the Jewish people. This was to atone for the sin of the golden calf. Fire came down, it consumed the sacrifices, and that clearly indicated God's approval, that the Jewish people had been forgiven. It couldn't get much better. But of course, we always know that very often these moments of hiatus, of joy, of zenith, of climax are overshadowed by some event. There's always a breaking of a glass. And the joy was turned to mourning and to trauma, at least for Aaron and his family, and in fact for the Jewish people. Tragedy struck as Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two sons, who were the most outstanding, greatest scholars and the future leaders of the Jewish people, that were serving as priests in the tabernacle. They were struck down and killed when a fire came down from on heaven, from on high, and they were killed on the spot. Aaron's response is telling. What is Aaron's response? Vayidom Aaron. Aaron was completely silent. He realized this was divine retribution, and he didn't understand it, but he recognized and accepted and acknowledged it. Very often when we find ourselves visiting, trying to console people that are inconsolable at the time of a tragic loss of life, a young person snatched away in their prime, we try to come up and say things that we think are clever and wise and philosophical. And really, Aaron's response, as I've heard the chief rabbi himself, is the way to conduct oneself in such circumstances. In other words, all we need to do is just be present, not to say a word. But that's an aside. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is simply, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, to Powell and all the others that are here. If you want to put your comments, then I'll know who's here. We want to try to understand very briefly what went wrong. It is something that's baffled and bemused some of the greatest of scholars. Yeah, here we have two great scholars, two of the future leaders of the Jewish people that were destined for greatness, that tried to come close. They offered sacrifices. And what do you think they were doing? Hi, Estelle. So they were trying to come closer to God. It wasn't that they were reckless or they were renegades or they were doing something, outrageous. They were serving God. And right at that moment of serving God, that was the moment they were struck down. Absolutely, shrouded in mystery. What went wrong? And of course, as you can imagine, there are many, many sources that try to come to grips with this. I'll share with you a few of the explanations that are given in the words of our sages, but then I want to have a look at a deep philosophical idea that I think will shed light on this and many other things in life. So fasten your seatbelts. So firstly, our sages tell us that they brought a sacrifice that had not been asked for. Number one. Number two, they did not consult with Aaron and Moshe before they did what they did. Number three, some suggest that they actually were intoxicated when they were serving in the tabernacle, which was strictly forbidden for the priests. Fourthly, they decided not to have children for whatever reason, and therefore they cut themselves off, as it were, from the purpose of humanity, which is, of course, to be fruitful and to multiply, to contribute to the world. And there are many, many others. They spoke badly about Aaron and Moshe, and so on and so forth. I want to stick to the verse itself and the interpretation of the Sfas Emes, one of the great sages of the Hasidic dynasty, and he quotes in the name of his grandfather, the Chidushei Harim, who he succeeded, and I'll share with you his idea. And it goes as follows. Okay, everyone ready? Good. Okay, the Torah tells us that there was a strange fire. Okay, let me quote you the verses. Don't worry, I won't keep you too long. Nadav and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took each of them his censer and put fire in it and put incense on it, offered a strange fire before Hashem, which he commanded them not. That's the critical phrase, Estelle. And a fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Okay? So, listen to the phrase. Estelle, you're a bit of an expert when it comes to English, so you'll be able to help us. What does the phrase, a strange fire, that he commanded them not to bring? Does it mean that they were commanded not to bring, or they had not been commanded to bring? It's not the same. Again, say it one more time. Is it that did they bring a fire, an incense, that they'd been commanded not to bring, a negative commandment, do not bring, or was it that they not being commanded to bring it? Okay, so the Baal Turim, I think it is, suggested that the fact that they had brought incense of their own initiative, of their own accord, was in itself seemed strange, and in the eyes of God, therefore, the fire that they brought was a strange fire. Now, so the idea is that it wasn't that they were commanded not to bring it. There's no negative commandment anywhere. But we'll see that what they did was of their own accord and was inappropriate. Now we have to ask ourselves, if I volunteer, surely the more service towards God, the more I serve Him, the more I want to do in mitzvot and other things. Isn't that what it's all about in life? Where could they possibly have gone wrong? So the Sfas Emes quotes in the name of his grandfather, the Chidushei Harim. He said, the phraseology that we mentioned, that he commanded them not, indicates that the fault lay in a fundamental flaw in carrying out a form of divine service that was not commanded for them to do so. In other words, the primary force for each and every one of us in our service of God is not necessarily what we decide, but it's the fact that there is that command. Okay? Again, of course, we are serving God, but that service is within a framework, within a structure, within a command and a system of governance, right? I can't decide when in any society how I want to contribute. I can't make up new laws, right? I'll give you an example. I want to be a very loyal citizen. So, Estelle, you'll remember when you used to live in Woodside Park. Let's say I'm driving down. Where am I driving? Okay, where there's a traffic light. I'm driving on towards Tally Ho Corner. Okay. Sorry, I'm driving towards Temple Fortune. Okay. And I come to the junction of Temple Fortune. I've got Kinloss on my right, and the light goes green, right? So I'm meant to go forwards, but I say to myself, I want to go above and beyond the law, and therefore I am going to, even on a green light, I'm going to stay where I am. I'm going to demonstrate my love, my loyalty and affection for the country, for the Queen, for the government, by introducing a new law that even on a green light, I'm going to stay stationary. You can imagine, you'd be arrested, pulled over, and thrown away behind bars. Because there is a system in place. Within that system, of course, the way that we are able to contribute, not just the contribution, but the way that we, through our personalities and our characters, contribute, is the mark of our person. But in terms of creating new laws, that's not for us to do. And now that, in essence, was where the wheels came off the wagon for Nadav and Abihu. Rather than just stay within the structure that had been given to them, they decided to go above and beyond to create a new structure, a new system. Think about Sinai just before this, okay? Think about what happened at Sinai. What was the statement by the Jewish people that showed that they were exceptionally committed, devoted, dedicated to serving God and to being his the loyal people? The answer is two words: Naseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. Now, every command requires us to understand the law, and in fact, you're deemed to know the law. So you have to know the law, and then you have to adhere. You have to ensure that you carry out the law in all senses, right? Not park on yellow lines, wear a face mask at the moment, and everything else. The Jewish people said in the counterintuitive order, they said, we will follow the laws, and afterwards we'll understand them. In other words, first and foremost, and for that they received tremendous reward. In other words, what the Jewish people demonstrated was that to be the Jewish people, to be God's chosen people, it means that we are willing to follow the strictures and the commands, whether it meets our approval, whether we understand it or not. It's not the other way around. Nadav and Abihu thought that they comprehended and they understood and they rationalized to themselves the laws, and they thought they could add a new form of service to God, even when it wasn't commanded. And clearly, as the Sfas Emes points out, there was a fundamental error in their ways. Despite the fact that they had the most laudable intentions, despite the fact that their desire and wish was to demonstrate their love for God in their act of service, they had missed the point. What was missing for them? The command was missing, which is what the verse actually says. Asher lo tzivah otam. They brought an incense offering which was not commanded. And however laudable it is, if it's not commanded, then it doesn't fit in the great ambit, within the framework, the aegis of divine service. We can't make it up. The greatest, we know a statement by our sages, greater is a person who does what is commanded of them than somebody who's not commanded and does of them. Now, there are certain mitzvot and laws that we are not obligated to do, but we can obligate ourselves. For example, every second of the day, I don't have to give charity. I don't have to do chesed. I don't have to do acts of loving kindness. But I can put myself in a situation where those opportunities open up. I can help run the shul. I can help old people. I can make phone calls. So I can put myself in a situation where I offer hospitality and I do all types of wonderful acts, very laudable. Okay? So certain times in my life, I am obligated to do things. Certain times it can be optional and I can opt in and opt out. But what I can't do is to add a third string to my bow, which is what Nadav and Abihu said, which is to go beyond, outside the framework of the legal system, of the laws, of what God wants from us. Every mitzvah is reflecting and demonstrating God's will, and say to God, I'm going to do something now, and this is going to become your will. This is what you really want. I'm going to second guess God. That's not service of God. That is, in a sense, self-service. The whole purpose of service is that we are prepared to forego, to subjugate our will for a higher will. And in fact, this is reflected in Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch's writings. He said, I quote, self-devised sacrifices would destroy the truth which is meant to achieve man's submission to it by the very sacrifice, and would mean the glorification of arbitrary subjectivity and placing it on the throne, which would be dedicated to holding exclusively to obedience to God. The Jewish priest function must be executed through the accomplishment of God's ordinances, not by inventing new ways of worship. Now, it's very attractive to create new modes of service in faith. And it may come from a sincere desire of self-expression and to come closer to God, right? But at the end of the day, despite its appeal of being very innovative, it's misguided and fundamentally flawed, because we've got to go back to the nuts and bolts. Service of God means exactly that. Listening to his will and not our will. Give you an analogy. And this is only in Israel could this happen. I don't know if you remember. I think it was, oh, Estelle, if only you were here, you tell me. I think it was 67. I'm going to hazard a guess. One of the wars, or maybe it was 82. One of the wars, Israel, I think maybe it was 82, it was Lebanon, I think it was the Lebanon War. And basically, Israel were told by their generals when they were pushing north to stop at a certain point. They took Mount Hermon and they were told, stay, that's it. Okay, this is as far as we're going. The generals that were in the north of Israel, being only this could happen in Israel, instead of listening to the command of their superior officers, they disregarded the chain of command and they pushed on, and they were going further and further and further, and they wanted to get to Damascus. Did they do the right thing or wrong thing? There was a land grab. They succeeded. It was a greater victory, and yet it was an abject failure, because the whole thing of serving in an army is discipline and following a chain of command. You cannot go about making up your own laws, even if you think you know better. You can't have such a system of everyone second guessing what the superior officer really intended, or he doesn't even know what he really means. We know better than him. That's anarchy. So service, be it in an army, in a country, and certainly service of the King of Kings, is about following and listening and subjugating our will for a higher will. That is what it's all about. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a place in our faith and in society for self-expression, for creativity, and for us to be able to make our own unique mark and contribution when we are part of a society and when we are serving God. Of course, that goes without saying. We know when it came to, in fact, the dedication of the tabernacle, it said, Kol nediv libo, anyone whose heart desired. Nediv lev, service of the heart, is what service is all about with God. But that comes within the structure, within a framework of commands. It's that gives us the structure, that gives us the foundations, that gives us a framework. And within that, of course, there is plenty of room for self-expression and self-creativity and to make our own unique mark. So I hope that explains where they went from, okay? And if we have a look at the trends, and this is without being too controversial since I'm being recorded, so I'll try and keep it vague. But if you look at the trends over the course of the millennia, you'll notice that there have been times where innovation and self-expression has been marveled and has been embraced by the Jewish people, and there have been times where it has caused a schism and has led to a breakaway, and eventually that breakaway has fizzled or died, or certainly not been accepted by the masses. Give you an example of where it has been accepted. I'm not going to do the other because I don't want to get myself in trouble. So Rameir Shapira, some of you may have heard of. So if you go to Lublin, and where Powell's from, he will certainly know who Rameir Shapira was. So he was the great Rosh Hashiva of Lublin, and he created and came up with a great brainstorm, this great idea, this great nugget called Daf Yomi. The idea that a folio of Talmud would be learnt around the world universally, the same page, wherever you are. Now, this was radical. This was not something at that time which was immediately accepted. There were challenges. What about the normal way of learning with depth, with incisiveness, right? And what about the fact that everyone's got to, learn at different levels and abilities, and yet eventually it became acknowledged and accepted and wholeheartedly became an integral part of Jewish learning and scholarship. So therefore, where it is within the structure, where it is scrutinized and determined that that idea, that innovation, that creative nuance is within a framework of halacha, of Jewish law, 100%. It can be embraced and it can be accepted, and it's a worthy contribution. Where it is that is seen to be changing Jewish law, diluting our faith, changing the unbroken transmission of our faith, the chain of tradition, then that is something that would not be accepted. It was quite clear at the time. You can't go of your own volition and offer incense. Nadav and Avihu thought they knew best. Without asking the authorities of the day, Moshe and Aaron, without listening to what the establishment said, to what the status quo was, they decided to create and to think that they knew best and knew better. And the result was tragic. There is a beautiful lesson, a positive lesson for each and every one of us as we conclude. Quite simply, there is so much opportunity for that passion. The fire that they brought, the fire of Judaism, the passion, the excitement, the inspiration is there for each and every one of us to find our own way. There are so many different opportunities, so many different paths, so many books, so much scholarship, so many opportunities in chesed, in kindness, so many opportunities between us and our fellow human beings. The key thing is that the structure and framework is there. All we have to do is to work within that and to walk that beautiful path and to take the next step along that path. And if we are able to do so, and if we look around, there are some extraordinary organizations, remarkable organizations that have been introduced and set up both here and in Israel that are doing incredible work and are, as it were, continuing the idea of passion, innovation, and creativity. Please God, we should all find our way to make our lasting mark on both our nation and on society as a whole. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Looking forward to seeing some of you in Shul. And please God, we'll see you all very soon. All the very best. Thank you for joining us.